I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a really interesting individual to introduce you to tonight. Joanne Roberts is her name. She's a writer and a political consultant. I read a fascinating column that she wrote about voting age. And then I got into researching a little about her and found out that she's just as fascinating as her fascinating article, if not more so. Because her voting age column suggested that we change the voting age to 16, which I thought was kind of radical and interesting, and I frankly support. And I think that we're going to chat about that a little bit. But also, she has recently written a book called Storm the Ballot Box, An Insider's Guide to a Voting Revolution. She's also a former interim leader of the Green Party of Canada. She lives in Halifax. And a lot of what she's about is getting people to vote again. Millions of Canadians, she says, are not voting. It's a crisis that threatens to undermine our democracy. Apathy, ignorance, and frustration mean a whole generation is losing faith in the value of the vote. Joanne Roberts, who's our guest tonight, suggests that one way to turn this around is to lower the voting age to 16. It's one of 20 concrete steps for how to kickstart a non-violent yet powerful voting revolution, empowering Canadians to mark their X no matter who they vote for. Find out what she thinks about voting age reductions and how they'll help us all improve voter turnout. Joanne Roberts, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
I'm
glad you liked the column. I never know when people say, I saw your column, they go, I think, well, are they in favor of it? But, one of the things about lowering the voting age is you're going to get a reaction.
Well, I got to tell you an honest story. My two sons were, I think, 12 and 14. And they were delegates to a convention. I won't tell you what political party they were delegates to. And they put forward a resolution to a policy convention to lower the voting age to 16. And they both spoke about it. In this political party, I'm not sure if all political parties, 12-year-olds were allowed to attend as delegates and vote. And they made the argument that it made sense that 16-year-olds should have the vote. Why do you think 16-year-olds should have the vote?
Well, for a lot of reasons, but I'm going to just add a corollary to what you just told me, that 14-year-olds currently vote for the leaders in all of the political parties. So, we won't let them vote for who should be government, but we can let them vote for who should lead the parties. Anyway, why do I think we should lower it? A lot of reasons, but here's my primary one, and it's really probably one of the major reasons I wrote the book, is Canadians aren't voting. There are millions of Canadians, 11 million Canadians in the last federal election didn't vote. That worries me because, I can get into all kinds of statistics, but let me put it simply. The older generation, that might include you and I, we're good voters. We're the highest turnout. But we're losing the little bit older than you and I. They are actually getting older. Oh, good. You've got the graph. So the graph will show you that, the 65 to 74, they're the winners. They're the big voters. And then you look at the sort of, I got to put my glasses on here, the 55 to 64, they're still voting in reasonably good numbers. But the 75 and over, that's my mother's generation, their numbers are dropping because they're becoming more feeble and less able to vote. But look at those two lower numbers, the first-time voters, 18 to 24, all electors and first time. they're down below 50%. That's a generation of voters that if we don't get them voting, we lose them. And our democracy then loses the. Well, I think we start to see people not voting. And then I question, are elections valid if our turnout is less than 50%?
I thought one thing, there's lots of interesting things
Yeah.
about this graph, but one thing that was interesting is the massive increase in young people turnout in 2015.
Well, and I think we all kind of know the answer to that one, right? Um, it's called Justin Trudeau. I mean, he got people excited and he got a lot of young people excited, and that is reflected there. But even with that, even with the turnout in 2015, you'll see everybody's turnout went up, right? We saw it I ran as a candidate in 2015, so I know this election pretty well. And I can tell you that the Canadians saw it as an important election, right? They saw it as an election where something mattered. I would say as much as anything, they were getting rid of a government. Stephen Harper had certainly the public was not supporting a lot of what Stephen Harper was doing at the time. And so that I knocked on a lot of doors where they said, our goal is to get rid of Stephen Harper, and we're going to vote for whoever can do that. It was kind of hard if you were a
Well,
Green Party
that's
member.
interesting. I'd like to challenge you for a second,
Yeah.
and I'll let you continue with what you thought the election was about. But I've heard some people say it was more about sunny ways. It was positivity. It was this can-do attitude that people got attracted to. That too often our politics are negativity and bringing people down and getting rid of something, and that appeals to the base and motivates the bases to come out, but it turns off a lot of the incremental extra voters. And if you want to get the incremental extra voters, and that turnout shows that
He
in
did.
2015 it certainly came out. And we don't know if he got it. I think he did, but it turned out. I've heard another assessment that it was all about cannabis, and they just came out because of the promise to legalize cannabis. I'm not sure if that's got.
That one I won't say has many numbers to go with it, but I will tell you something that turned that election around. And if you look at the Liberal analysis of their own election, do you remember the photograph of Alan Curie, his name was, the little boy on the beach who had drowned?
Yep.
And we had a government that was turning its back on immigration. I mean, that's to be questioned. But suddenly you had Justin Trudeau showing a humanity, and this isn't who Canada is. We
Wasn't
will
that
take
the
in
election
people.
of the stitch line?
Yeah, so it was. So what kind of Canadians did we want to be? I do think that was an issue in that election, and I do think Sunny Ways played into that. Canadians said, we're not the snitch line. We're not turning our back on the other. It'd be interesting to see if that would work right now. But I think Justin Trudeau came along and said, hey, this is who we are. We're positive Canadians. We take in people in need. We're caring. I mean, that I think was a very resonant message. And I think it did appeal. The other thing he said, and I'd like to hold him to it, is that was going to be the last election under first past the post. Now,
1,500 times, I'm told.
yes, exactly. That's in the book. And as someone who had to listen to a lot of people tell me on a doorstep, I came second in that election in the riding I was in. I had 32% of the vote. And lots of people said to me, well, Joanne, we'll vote for you next time when it's a proportional vote or, a ranked ballot when it's not first past the post. But right now, we have to be sure that we vote for someone who can defeat Stephen Harper and who can win. And we're not sure Greens can do that. So, I think we're both right here. Sunny Ways played a role. Absolutely, it did.
I've heard other people say the length of the campaign, which was one of the longest, if not the longest campaigns in history, helped. And the example that I had is someone compared it to the U.S., where when the election date is, and some people think the election campaigns in the U.S., which are like a year long, because you go through the primary process
Yeah.
in the winter and the spring, first of all, with the conventions in the summer, and then the elections in November. You've got a year, or at least almost a year, to really get to know people. And And in Canada, for some reason, we don't really start paying attention until the writ drops, even if we know when the election is. And certainly it
Exactly.
seems to be this whole sort of competition to try to make the election campaigns as short. And it's interesting because Stephen Harper, I think, had a strategy of a long campaign because then he thought people would see Trudeau's weaknesses. And
No, no,
another
no, no, no. He had a long campaign for one reason and one reason only. He could spend more money and he had the most money to spend. That there's only one reason for a long campaign if you're in government, and if you have as much money as the Conservatives had at that time, because election spending is based on how many days you're campaigning.
But am I not right that Trudeau and the Liberals were in third place until halfway through the campaign?
Absolutely.
So
So
that long campaign helped them.
I don't think it did. I don't. I personally. I mean, they've won other elections without that long a campaign. I. I mean, there are those who will say that this was a strategy for Stephen Harper. He, I don't, I no one really knew what Justin Trudeau was going to be like as a campaigner. So they were hoping that their negative advertising, you remember they ran a lot of advertising before the election was called. Do you remember the just not ready, he's got good hair? Right? So that they thought we will define him before the election because they had lots of money. That's money you don't get back. If you spend the money in the election campaign, you get some of it back. If you spend it outside the election writ period, you don't get it back.
Okay,
So the concern,
I got one other thing
yes,
to
go ahead.
challenge you with. I've been told that it was the first election where a non-baby boomer or older was running, and so this was the youngest person running in a long period of time, and if not, frankly, forever.
How old was Joe Clark when he was elected? Do you know?
I
I'd
don't
have to
know,
look
but
that
he
up.
would have been a baby boomer.
Yeah.
So young at the time, but a baby boomer, and so this is the first person, and that was what that youth is what appealed to young people and motivated them to turn out.
Yeah, I would say that's true. There's truth in that. I mean, Justin Trudeau was the first leader of a party to be taking selfies, and he had a different approach than the Liberal campaign team took advantage of that, took a risk. They were in third place. They had nothing to lose. Let's go out there and run a different kind of campaign. And I think they changed how campaigns are run because that whole idea, roll up your shirt sleeves, get out there and take the selfies, use social media in an effective way. They did all of that well. I'm not saying there was only one thing that, sort of changed that election, but having also run in elections since then, I can tell you that one of the things that is becoming a constant is people are deciding they're voting against something, not for something.
Right.
And that turns off voters. So
So
back to
so
your original point, that turns off voters.
so turnout has gone down dramatically
Yep.
over time, and turnout is very much lower for younger cohorts than it is for older cohorts. And so, therefore, you've come out with a recommendation that we lower the voting age to 16. But if younger people don't vote, you're going to have a whole bunch of younger people that are eligible to vote but aren't going to vote. And if it's by any kind of a trend that is similar to the trend that you've shown, it's going to be like 30% are going to vote. And some people have contended, and this has been a big argument in the UK because I understand right now England is thinking about following Scotland and Wales and lowering the voting age. One of the biggest criticisms has been that young people, they think, tend to vote the way their parents vote. And so therefore it is sort of the people that are motivated and the base that are going to get their kids to come out, and all you're going to do is further the voting intentions of the elderlies, the elder people, the parents. So we're going to take a
Well,
break for messages, and when I come back, I'm going to ask you
okay.
why you want to give the vote to 16-year-olds. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with Joanne Roberts. We've talked about how turnout's gone down, how turnout is low for young people. So why the heck have more of them eligible to vote if they're not going to vote? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Joanne Roberts with me tonight. She's just recently written an article that was in the paper that you may have read about reducing the voting age to 16. And she's also recently written a book called Storm the Ballot Box, An Insider's Guide to a Voting Revolution. She's also a former interim leader of the Green Party of Canada, and she lives in Halifax. And I didn't realize that you got 32% of the vote in your 2015 election.
Yeah,
Like,
in
that's got to be
Victoria.
one of the best performances for a Green Party, other than the people that won. Like, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, 23,666 people voted for me.
Who
I
who
always I always say if I have a tattoo, that's what it'll be.
who is the victor?
It was a New Democrat, Murray Rankin.
And then the Liberals and the Conservatives were behind you.
Yes. The Liberal got pulled from the race, and the Conservative didn't bother showing up for anything. So it was a two-way race in the end, which is probably
Congratulations.
why,
That's
yeah. No,
really impressive.
look, you know what? I like to say that losers very seldom write books. In politics, it's usually from the winners that you hear. And I've run in 4 elections and I've never won any of them, but I think it does give me a perspective. I have been in those back rooms. I spent 40 years as a journalist before I became a politician. So I've been in the newsrooms as well. And I think the perspective I bring to this is a little bit of that journalism mind and a little bit of that backroom political elbows up. Boy, that's we can't use that anymore, can we? Because it belongs to the Liberals. But I understand what it's like to be on the hustings, and I'm not a Pollyanna about, oh, we can fix everything just because we lower the voting age. But I'm going to answer your argument about, oh, we'll just get a bunch of people who can vote and then they won't vote. There's really good research out there that if you vote in the first election you are eligible for, that you will vote in every election thereafter. It's just that it becomes something you go, well, that wasn't so bad, so I'll do it when it comes up again. And the problem with 18-year-olds not having a great turnout when they got the vote was because they'd just left high school. They'd also probably just started maybe a first job. They were in a transition. They weren't in an environment that encouraged them to vote. And I agree with you. Yes, some of them are going to vote the way their parents tell them to vote, but at least they'll vote. They'll be in there by themselves and they'll mark a ballot. But more importantly, they're going to be influenced by what happens in their classroom. And right now in Canada, I say if we're going to lower the voting age, let's make civics mandatory. It's not mandatory in Canada right now. So let's have them in a kind of a captive audience. Let's teach them about our democracy. How does it work? Why your vote is important. And then let's let them practice. Let's let them go do it. So there are about 400,000 16-year-olds and 400,000 17-year-olds. So we're not likely to change the outcome of the election, but we are going to bring voters into our democracy.
So I think that you've got a great idea.
Okay,
I'll give you a great analogy and an analogy you may not like, but I think they're both good analogies. Blood donor statistics are very similar. That if you donate blood once in your teenage years or your early adult years, you'll tend to donate blood the rest of your life. If you don't get used to it in high school or university, you don't donate. And it's very difficult to get a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old to start donating blood. And now
I like that analogy. I think that's actually I mean, I know
I'll give you
sometimes
a,
I feel
I'll
like
give
I'm
you,
giving
a,
blood when I'm voting.
I'll give you another analogy, which you may not like as much, but it's also
True.
equally
Okay.
true. And it's one of the reasons why I used to work for a beer company.
Okay.
One of the reasons why beer companies spend so much money advertising at universities and donate beer, openers and caps and all this kind of stuff, is because if you tend to start drinking one brand of beer at university, the preponderance is greater than 50% that you'll drink that as your first choice of beer brand for the rest of your life. So
Mm.
once you start doing something, you keep doing it
You
because
keep doing it.
I think the other thing that my one of my sons made an argument of is if all the people in grade 11 and 12 are going to civics classes and have the vote, every politician is going to go to an all candidates meeting at that school. The exposure that those kids are going to get to the political ideas and thought in a positive way, that they're actually having people come and explain their positions to them because they're going to be captive. They're going to be at school. They're going to be in civics class. They're going to be interested in, they're going to be invited to, that you're going to get an incredibly well-informed group of people versus the people, and you use the example of first job. The other example would be away at university. There's a whole bunch
Yeah.
of people that are going to
Yeah.
be voting for the first time in our current system that are away in a town they don't know. They don't know what the riding boundaries are. They don't know who the politicians are. They don't know, frankly, what some of the big issues are in that town because they're brand new to that university. And so we've structured a system where the real potential strength of voting in high school is not there. And the potentiality of voting in your first job or the first time you moved out of the home or the first time you moved away to university, where your sort of connection with your community is the lowest, is where you get your first vote.
And I mean, I think your point about meeting politicians is an important one. And we have four grown kids, and they're all adults, and I'm pleased to say they're all voters. But I decided to use them as a focus group for the book and ask them, why do you vote, and what influenced you growing up? And without a doubt, I think all four of them at some point talked about meeting a politician. Now, remember, I worked for a radio station for the CBC, and so we talked a lot about politics, but because of what I did, they attended all candidates meetings and they knew people who were in politics. I think too often our young people who are going to be expected to vote when they turned 18 have no idea who these politicians are. And because they don't vote, it's not in the politicians' interest to necessarily go out and get to know them all. Where if they were qualified voters, I guarantee you, just as you said, Brian, those candidates would be at the schools. Politicians between elections would be at the schools. Suddenly we'd see platforms reflect things that young people cared about. I worry that, we ignore this group of people and they don't vote. And politicians are practical. They look at who does vote and they tailor their messages and what they're offering to the people who do vote. That leaves out a whole cohort that, people from 18 to, well, jeepers, these days 18 to almost 45, that's starting to frighten me because these people have a lot of things that they need and they want to talk to politicians about.
So a study done in Scotland tracked people that
Yep.
voted after the voting age was lowered to 16, and they found out that the voting turnout increased for 7 subsequent elections.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. And I mean, Germany, they've also done the research now in Scotland, Wales, German states, Austria, and Latin America, and they found the same trend. It doesn't change the outcome, or at least in the places that they studied. It doesn't change the outcome dramatically because guess what? 16 and 17-year-olds are as diverse as the rest of the population, and some of it may reflect that they, are hearing politics talked about in their families. But it does change the turnout. And in my opinion, that's a game changer.
Another study done in Europe was kind of interesting. What they found is that if 16 and 17-year-olds had the vote, the turnout was equal across income quotients. But that when people in their 20s are voting, only wealthy people tend to vote, or kids from wealthy families. And so therefore there's a real inequality in the people that go to the ballot box.
Yeah.
And so you got to ask yourself, which is fair? Just the rich voting or everyone voting?
And let me tell you a story about a young voter. So I was helping out on an election in Ontario. I was up in Parry Sound, Muskoka, and I broke my sandal. I had to go get some super glue at the dollar store. It was the day before the election. I walked in, I had my t-shirt on, and I said to the young woman with blue hair and a lot of piercings at the checkout, "You going to vote tomorrow?" And she said no. And I said, "Why not?" She goes, "I'm not smart enough to vote." Now, Brian, that broke my heart. Here was a young woman, vibrant, she knew there was an election on, but she didn't think she should be able to vote. That's the other thing I think we're saying to young people when we don't give them the vote till they're 18 and then don't give them any training at 18, is we leave them listening to the pundits and the pollsters and all of it. I mean, during an election campaign, you turn on any broadcast and you're going to hear lots of people trying to figure out what's going to happen. And it does make it sound like you need some degree in political science to be able to vote. when the truth is you don't. That's what I said to this young woman. I said, I'll give you 4 websites. You can go check out who the 4 candidates are. You can vote tomorrow. And she said, no, I don't think I need to know who's doing what and who's going to win. And I don't think I can do that. So there's the other thing that I think in school we would empower people from all walks of life to realize they can vote. And, they won't be hit by lightning if they vote for the wrong person, which sometimes I listen to our own rhetoric and think, yeah, we make it sound like you need a PhD in political science to vote.
I didn't realize that the vote in the United States for people to the age of 18 wasn't until the 1950s or 60s.
Yeah,
But up
yeah.
until then, it was 21. And the big move to lower it was because they changed the age of military draft to 18
So do
during
you know when we
World War II.
lowered the vote in Canada?
I don't.
It's going to shock you. 1970.
And what was it before? 21?
21, yeah. And you know what the fight was from the end of the Second World War? Because we allowed those who were enlisted, who were 18 to 21, to vote, right? During the war years. And right after, if you were a veteran, you were allowed to vote. So immediately people started to say, well, if you felt they were able to vote then, shouldn't we lower the voting age to 18? And that fight went on from 1947 to 1970 when it was finally changed.
That's interesting. Um, when can you drive?
16. Believe me, I was there on my 16th birthday.
Or when
Uh,
when can you drink?
well, you can't, depends where you live, 18, 19. When can you get married?
I don't know. What's the answer?
16 with your parents' permission.
When are you tried as an adult versus a juvenile?
Now, that's an argument I get from a lot of people that the court has to decide. But once you're 16, the court can decide you'll be tried as an adult. Here's the other thing. When do you pay taxes? You pay taxes if you're working as a 16-year-old. And I don't know, I heard somewhere that, no taxation without representation. So we should think about that.
So, have other countries tried this?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they have tried it. And as you mentioned, the UK is about to their next election, 16-year-olds will be able to vote. I mean, there's some states in the United States, but Argentina, Austria, Brazil, Cuba, Ecuador, Guernsey, Isle of Man, Jersey, Malta, Nicaragua, Scotland, Wales, all let people vote at 16. Greece and Indonesia at 17. And so it's not like and there are states in the United States where you can, I don't know, I won't list them all up, but where you can vote when you're 16. You and I both talked about political parties let people vote from 14. So I think it is an argument. We shouldn't go about it too, sort of, oh, well, no big difference. But the Supreme Court may be where this will be decided in Canada, because a group of young people from across the country have a case before the Supreme Court right now. It's called the Penny Crocker et al., so that means the other kids, versus Canada. And it was filed in April. Well, they filed the evidence in April 2024, so last April. And cross-examination is supposed to happen before the end of this year. So it'll be sometime next year, I think, where we'll probably get a decision on this. So if the Supreme Court were to come out and say we have violated the rights of young people, then the government may be forced to act.
If people wanted to do it, how would we actually implement it? By way of a constitutional amendment, or could different
It would be the Elections Act in Canada could be changed. The Elections Act itself says who can vote and defines who a voter is. So it's simply an act of parliament. We don't have to change the Constitution. And, like we've done it. Like this is the thing. Do you remember in 2019, there was quite a debate over this. Citizens who'd been living abroad for 5 years were given back the vote. Because it had been taken away if you stayed outside the country for more than 5 years. And this was very difficult, especially for people who were posted with the military or with foreign affairs. They weren't able to vote. and they challenged it. And so the Harper government had taken it away, and in 2019 it was given back. In 2002, we had a fight to have prisoners who were serving a sentence of more than 2 years. They were given the right to vote, although we're not doing a very good job of making sure that they actually get the information they need to vote. So, I liken it a little bit to, because the arguments I hear sound very similar to when women got the right to vote, right?
Well, that was a mistake, wasn't it?
Yeah, what? We let all those women vote?
That was a joke for anyone that's got this transcript.
Yeah,
At least
yeah, Brian was
attempt at
kidding
it.
me. And it wasn't until 1948 that you could vote. You had to own property to vote. So if you were a renter and you didn't own a piece of property before 1948, you couldn't vote. So, so I think we need to talk about our society today and say, is this a time where 16-year-olds, they're, so I sometimes hear the argument, well, they're not, their brains haven't developed enough to let them vote. But the research has been done. It was done in California by a number of organizations, number of universities there, primarily Stanford, and they've said, yes, you're as intellectually able, prepared to vote as anyone who is 25. So that argument's not going to hold either.
So we're going to take a break for some messages. And when we come back, I'm going to ask our guest to share some of her other ideas on how we storm the ballot box. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I forgot to do the 15 seconds.
Okay, let's do it again.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest is Joanne Roberts, who's written a really interesting book called Storm the Ballot Box and a fascinating article about reducing the voting age to 16. Joanne, I wonder if you could share some of your other ideas on storming the ballot box. 20 concrete steps we could do to increase voter turnout.
Well, let me preface it by saying, we could have a whole other conversation, Brian. I think we should talk about moving to some form of proportional representation in the country. But I know that that's been argued a lot, and there are others who are making the case, I would say, better than me on this. So I'm going to leave that on the table. That would be my first choice. Let's get a proportional system in Canada. But let me talk about the low-hanging things that we could do easily. I mean, for example, in Australia, where they have mandatory voting, by the way, and we could discuss that in a minute, but they give every election day is a holiday, the whole day, not just 4 hours to go and vote, but the whole day is a holiday. They have barbecues. They call them democracy sausages at the polling stations. It's a party. People come out to vote because it's a good time. We make it sound like having a root canal in Canada. I mean, why don't we have a holiday? Let's make buses free on election day. Let's get out there and say, so you say to your neighbors, I'll see you at the polling place. Let's have the home and schools have barbecues and maybe have an incentive. I mean, someone said to me, well, Joanne, maybe we should just have a tax break. You get a credit if you vote. And I'm not opposed to that, except I know there are a lot of people who a tax break means very little to them. So I'm thinking, well, how about, we give people a day pass to the national park. I'd say people would come out to vote if you gave them a free ice cream. We just haven't said we value your vote. And I think it is time to bring in an incentive for the vote. So I'd like to see some discussion about that. Now, another thing that I'm experimenting with, and I get lots of arguments about this, but we didn't put the name of the party on the ballot till 1972. So you had to know, if you were going in to vote for Brian Crombie, what party Brian Crombie was with, because it didn't say it on the ballot. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't consider going back to that. And there's a reason for that. Right now, we have gone to we're not voting necessarily for individuals. We don't know our candidates very well. We're voting for a national platform and a national party. And I'm not saying that's wrong. There are times when people should decide that that's what they're voting for. But I also want people to get to know their candidates, to get to know the person who's going to be their representative. And I'm wondering, how do we do that? And one of the ways I think we could do that is to make it more important for candidates to get their own name out there and not just their party brand.
Okay. Any others?
Well, yeah, this one's a little more complicated, but I think we took away the per vote subsidy in Canada. That is that, when I was running in 2015, that was the last election with a per vote subsidy. Those 23,666 people who voted for me, each of those votes was worth $1.56 to the Green Party. And so the riding I was in got money because I got votes. So the vote had a value, even if I didn't get elected. And that stayed with the riding as long as I got over 10% of the vote, and the party nationally got over 2%. That money could be used to help the party prepare for the next election. That was taken away. We have no public funding in federal elections now. And it's been very hard on smaller parties, particularly the NDP and the Green Party. And I think we're heading to a two-party state unless that changes. Because smaller parties spend all their time trying to just raise enough money to keep themselves afloat, rather than spending their time and their energy talking about, the issues that are before Canadians.
Well, that's fascinating. So I've got a couple of my own recommendations. Can I suggest a few? So I've got a few suggestions. I think compulsory voting makes a ton of sense. And I think one of the reasons why, and I think Australia has proven this out, and I've had personal experience with this, just like you probably have. I've campaigned in numerous different election campaigns. And I get frustrated that the vast majority of the time, what the canvassers are doing, what the political organizations are doing, is what they call voter ID. They're identifying the vote. They go to household after household, either by way of phone or by way of internet or by way of a personal knock on the door, just to find out which party you typically vote for. They're not there to actually tell you much about their parties. They're not there to talk to you. They're not there to discuss with you. They're not there to try to convince you to vote for their guy or gal. They just want to know which way you typically vote, because if you vote their way, they're going to come back and bug you to get out and vote on election day. And they're going to give you some brochures and they're going to ask you to take a sign. And if you vote for the other guy, they're not going to say anything. They want to discourage you from going out and voting. And so we have this incredible amount of negative campaigning. The
Wow,
campaigns.
I totally agree with you. My worry is that the country is not ready for anything that's mandatory right now. We have had quite a pushback on people being told what to do. But you're right. Do you know what goes?
Okay, I hear you that we may not be back. We may not be ready for it, but I think it's the right thing. And I think that what would happen is that you would have a lot less voter ID and negative advertising and just get out the vote. All the attention would be on persuasion, because everyone was going to the ballot box, so you'd want to try to persuade them to your side. And I think it would be a very positive. And people say they don't like compulsory. I would make it an incentive and a disincentive. I would have $500 if you vote and a $500 tax increase if you don't vote. So it would be self-financing.
Well, in Australia, it's cheaper than that. It's $50 if you don't vote, and
They've
they have
got
a very.
97% turnout with a
I
50 bucks.
know. I know, and Australians are pretty independent people. I mean, they're not, it's not like they sort of live in a country where people are telling them what to do. And you won't find Australians going, we don't want this way. In fact, they actually had a referendum to ask if they wanted to go back to not having mandatory voting, and they said no, we want to keep it this way. So I'm with you on that. I do think we have changed how our elections are run because we don't have mandatory. The Electoral Reform Commission listened to all the arguments on mandatory voting and then decided not to recommend it. But I think we should, maybe you and I could start this, Brian. We'll become pro-mandatory voting committee, shall
Okay, I've got
we?
another one for you. I think recall, which
Mm,
exists in the United States and sometimes has been done in some places in Canada, I think is also good because the reality is, if a politician is threatened by a recall vote, they smarten up, even if the recall vote doesn't happen because they don't get enough people to sign up for it. So I think recall,
yeah.
you can fire someone on a contract, you can get rid of someone halfway through their tenure, but for some reason you can't get rid of MPs or provincial members of parliament halfway through the term. And I think you should be able to. So I think recall would be an incredibly important, decisive measure to put in that voters would have a way of disciplining someone that is completely inappropriate and wrong.
What do you think about term limits?
I like the idea of term limits. I've done a lot of business in Dallas as an
Yeah.
example. And Dallas, it's a two-term limit, typically. And what that does is creates the incentive for up and out. And so what ends up happening is someone starts as a counselor and then they become a mayor and then they become a
Yeah.
state senator and then become a state representative and then they become a congressperson and then they become a senator and it's or run for governor or something like that. And it's a progressive system. I think that the power of incumbency is way too powerful. Now, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if two-term limits is the right number. Maybe it's
No, I'm not either. I mean, but I'm with you. I think there has to be some kind of a limit because incumbency is very powerful and you stop getting good people stepping up because they go, oh, so and so always gets reelected, right? And you have great name recognition and you have the ability because you've been elected. I mean, it gives you an advantage. There's no two ways about it.
massive.
But I do think you could combine it with recall, like so have a term and I would keep the threshold high for recall, very high, so that it has to be just I don't like, that you didn't come to Granny's 100th birthday, so I'm going to start a recall campaign. But that if something, I think what people don't have right now, and they don't see their vote as being that, is a way to be heard, right? They feel that, and we've had these majority governments that go, well, we got the power, we're doing it our way. And oh, yeah, we promised that. No, we're not going to do that after all. So we have no truth in advertising for politicians. Do you realize that they do not qualify under the Truth in Advertising Act?
I don't.
They don't. And none of them, when it's brought up to them, want to actually do that. Well, it'd be hard to prove. But I think there has to be some accountability. So I don't know if I'd go as far as recall, but I might, where at least you could file a complaint if someone didn't keep a promise and they would have to go before a commissioner and show why. And if they had no valid reason, that there would be repercussions. In New Brunswick, for example, they've started something that is moving in that direction where if you make a promise during an election campaign, you have to cost it. And it has to be put on a public page. And if you can't cost it, you have to say you can't cost it. And so all the parties can check what, at least if nothing else, how much everybody plans to spend. And you can track them. I mean, for a while there, you could promise the moon, everybody gets a new bridge, everybody gets this, and yet no costing for it. So I think we need more accountability built into campaign promises. I also think we need to look at career politicians. So maybe it's a 3 or a 4 term
Okay, so
limit.
I've got one last controversial
Okay.
suggestion for you. I think primaries are good. I think the nomination process in political parties in Canada is absurd. I think the fact that 100 people in a church basement or the Veterans Association, or frankly, sometimes less than 100 people, and or frankly, a couple thousand people that are all organized by a racial group or a religious group or a baseball club or something like that, can pack a room and elect a candidate. And I think the fact that you nominate a candidate 4 years ahead of the time is wrong. And I think that the primary system that they have in the United States, where people that declare themselves as a Democrat or Republican, and frankly independents, can vote in a primary. It's a lot closer to one person, one vote. And I think that you would end up getting far better candidates running. You would have far less power in the unelected PMO or leaders' offices, and the people that I think deserve to get their candidacy nominated by the different parties would do so. So I like the idea of a primary system that is held a year before or in the year before the election, be the way that we elect our leaders and our candidates.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that because I think what we've seen in the United States is that they have voter fatigue. I mean, their voter turnout's terrible as well, by the way, and they do have voter fatigue there. They've shown that people just feel they're constantly in an election cycle, and you would find, unless we were careful about how we dealt with it, that you would have interest groups taking over primaries, which is what they have done in the States. But I have a comeback on that one because I think you're onto something. I am suggesting that if you are a candidate who has been nominated for by an official political party and you've gone through a nomination contest, so not an acclamation, that there would be a public subsidy like EI to replace income. Because here's what's happening to so many people is that if they get nominated too early, they have to give up their job. So you're only getting people who are wealthy or have a kind of job where being a political candidate pays you to do it. And I think we need more people to get in the system. I think you're right. So I say let's give them some incentive, and that is there will be funding if you go through a nomination race and if you're not acclaimed, and that we take that acclamation power away from political parties.
Joanne Roberts, this has been a really interesting conversation. Now, remind us the title of the book, please.
Aha, the book. It's called Storm the Ballot Box, An Insider's Guide to a Voting Revolution, and it's published by Nimbus.
Joanne Roberts, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think that your idea of reducing the voting age to 16 makes a ton of sense, and I hope that somebody's listening and will enact it. And I like some of your other ideas. And I think if nothing else, we have to have a conversation about it because our voting turnout is down dramatically, and I think that's a travesty. And we need to change it, and we need to change it quick. But more importantly than all that, I got to get you back sometime to talk about Green Party and some of the Green Party policies. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 a.m. You can stream me online, even from Halifax, Nova Scotia, at www.saga960am.ca. All my programs get put on my website, briancrombie.com, on podcast servers, on social media, on the YouTube channel, and get broadcast to air as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thanks, everybody. Good night. Thanks, Joanne.